The room is bathed in the sterile, expensive glow of the Metropolitan High Care Pavilion. The machines are breathing for her, a rhythmic, mechanical hiss that underscores the silence of the woman in the bed. A man leans over his wife's pillow, his shadow stretching long across the luxury suite. In a voice so quiet it barely stirs the air, he utters the words he has been suppressing since the accident, 3 weeks ago. "You're better off dead, Cassie." He reaches out, his fingers lingering on her chin, gripping it with a firm, possessive strength before smoothing the blue satin of her gown. He looks like a grieving husband. He looks like a man who has done nothing wrong. What Victor Laurent does not know, what he cannot see from his position beside the bed, is that the heavy oak door behind him hasn't fully latched. And the man standing in the sliver of shadow in that doorway heard every single word. Now, here is the part Victor Laurent did not account for. The man in that doorway did not call for the hospital security. He did not gasp. He did not retreat. He simply watched, his black leather gloves tight against his knuckles, waiting for the perfect moment to enter. This is the story of what happened next. If this story pulled you in for even a second, kindly support me with likes, comments and also subscribe. It means the world to me. Her name is Cassandra Quinn. To the world, she is the innocent girl, the heiress to a shipping empire who maintained a heart of gold despite her immense wealth. She grew up protected, shielded by a father who built a kingdom and a mother who taught her that kindness was the ultimate currency. At 26, she was the crown jewel of her family's legacy, a woman who believed that if you were good to the world would be good to you. Right now, she is lying in a bed on the penthouse floor of the pavilion, paralyzed, unable to move, unable to scream, and completely, terrifyingly aware of the monster sitting beside her. The mind does not go quiet just because the muscles have failed. She can feel the coldness of his hand on her skin. She can hear the distant hum of the city traffic 60 floors below. She can sense the shift in the room the moment Victor drops the act. Victor Laurent is 32. He is a man of average looks and extraordinary ambition. He understood early that a well-placed smile and a plain white button-down could hide a multitude of debts. He married Cassandra 18 months ago, providing her a sense of peace she thought she needed after her father passed. She did not see the gambling debts piling up. She did not see the resentment he felt every time he had to ask her for a loan. Tonight, he greets the evening nurse, Eloane, by her first name. He asks about Cassandra's oxygen levels with the exact frequency of a man heartbroken by his wife's condition. He has calibrated this performance for months. He straightens her blanket with slow, careful hands while Eloane watches, her heart breaking for the devoted husband. The nurse steps out. The door swings behind her, stopping just 2 inches short of the frame. A gap just wide enough to reveal a slice of the hallway. Victor does not check the door. He leans in, his goatee brushing Cassandra's ear, his voice dropping to that low, tender rasp that certain kinds of cruelty use as a mask. "The doctors say you can't hear me," he whispers, a slow exhale hitting her cheek. "But I know you're in there. Watching. Waiting. Well, look at you now." His eyes move over the 4 lines and the stillness of her hands. "You're better off dead." He adjusts her pillow with a chilling tenderness, sits back, and checks his watch. Cassandra heard everything. What Victor cannot see is the shadow in the 2-inch gap of the door. Leonard Voss is standing there, and the debt of honor he owed Cassandra's father has just become a death warrant for the man sitting in that chair. The silence of the suite was not empty, it was a heavy, suffocating weight that pressed down on Cassandra's chest more firmly than the medical censors. To anyone walking by, she was a portrait of tragic stillness, a beautiful girl in blue satin lost in a dreamless sleep. But inside the vault of her mind, Cassandra was screaming. She tracked the movement of the dust motes dancing in the sterile light, unable to blink her eyes to clear the tears that had pooled into a cold film. She felt every vibration of Victor's footsteps as he paced the room, his facade of the grieving widower-to-be finally discarded now that the nurse had vanished. Victor walked over to the window, looking out at the sprawling city skyline. He wasn't praying for her recovery. He was checking his reflection in the glass, adjusting his collar with the detached vanity of a man preparing for a celebration. Cassandra remembered the man she thought she married, the one who brought her wildflowers and listened to her stories about her father's shipping docks. That man was a ghost, a character played by a low-level actor who had finally landed the role of a lifetime. The man in the room now was a stranger, a predator who looked at her luxury hospital bed as if it were a coffin he was waiting to nail shut. He turned back toward her, the floorboards creaking under his weight. He didn't come to hold her hand. Instead, he reached into the drawer of her bedside table and pulled out her velvet jewelry box. Cassandra's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic rhythm that the monitor translated into a series of rhythmic beeps. Victor didn't even flinch at the sound. He opened the box, the light catching the heirloom emeralds that had belonged to her mother. He ran a thumb over the stones, a greedy glint in his eyes that made Cassandra feel physically ill. The insurance adjuster called again today, Cassie, he said, his voice casual, as if he were discussing the weather. They're asking a lot of questions about the brakes on the car. But don't you worry. By the time they find anything, I'll be long gone, and you'll be at peace. He tucked the jewelry box into his pocket, the fabric of his white shirt straining against the stolen weight. He leaned over her one last time, his face inches from hers. She could smell the coffee on his breath and the cheap cologne he used to mask the scent of the bars he frequented. He looked at her unblinking eyes with a terrifying lack of empathy. To him, she was already gone. She was just a body taking up space, a final obstacle between him and the fortune he hadn't earned. He reached out to turn off the small reading lamp, plunging the room into a deep, bruised purple twilight. In that darkness, Cassandra felt the true terror of the silence. It was the sound of her life being erased while she was still within it. She closed her mental eyes, praying for a miracle, unaware that the miracle was already standing 2 inches past the door, draped in Italian silk and fueled by a cold, righteous fury. The door did not creak when it opened, it glided on its hinges with a silent, predatory grace. Victor, startled by the sudden shift in the room's pressure, whirled around, his hand instinctively flying to the pocket containing the stolen emeralds. He expected a nurse or perhaps a tired doctor on a midnight round. Instead, he found himself staring into the cold, obsidian eyes of Leonard Voss. Leonard didn't just occupy the space, he dominated it, his 3-piece suit and armor of shadows against the clinical white of the room. The black leather gloves he wore remained taut over his knuckles, never once twitching with hesitation. Victor's mouth went dry, his bravado evaporating like mist under a heat lamp. He knew that face. Everyone in the city knew the face of the man who had turned the underworld into an organized machine of iron and silence. Mr. Voss, Victor stammered, his voice cracking as he tried to regain his footing. This is a private room. My wife, she's very ill. You can't be here. Leonard didn't answer immediately. He walked past Victor as if the man were nothing more than a piece of discarded furniture, moving straight to Cassandra's side. He looked down at her, and for a fleeting second, the terrifying hardness in his gaze softened into something resembling a grim promise. He remembered the girl who had once offered a desperate, bleeding boy a glass of water and a place to hide in her father's warehouse. The debt was decades old, but in Leonard's world, blood never dried. I heard you, Victor, Leonard said, his voice a low, melodic baritone that carried the weight of a falling guillotine. He didn't look back at the husband, he kept his eyes on Cassandra's pale, unmoving face. "I heard what you whispered. I heard what you want. And I have decided that you are not going to get it." Victor tried to puff out his chest, a desperate display of everyman defiance. "You can't just come in here and threaten me. I'm her husband. I have the legal right." Leonard turned then, a movement so swift and controlled it stole the air from Victor's lungs. He stepped into Victor's personal space, the scent of expensive tobacco and old power radiating from him. "You have no rights here," Leonard whispered, leaning in just as Victor had done to Cassandra, but with a lethality that was far from a bluff. "From this moment, you do not exist to her. If you step within a mile of this building, if you call her name, or if you even think about the money you've stolen, I will make the accident you planned for her look like a mercy." He reached out, his gloved hand moving with terrifying slowness to pat Victor's cheek. It was a gesture of utter dismissal. "Tiago," Leonard called out without raising his voice. The door swung wide, and a hulking man with the build of a mountain stepped in. "Take Mr. Laurent to the elevator. Ensure he understands that his residency in this city has reached its expiration date." As Victor was hauled, trembling and silent, from the suite, Leonard turned back to Cassandra. He placed a steady, gloved hand over hers. "You can rest now, little Quinn," he murmured. "The lion is at the door." The hospital suite, once a place of stagnant dread, transformed overnight into a fortress of activity. Leonard Voss did not believe in half-measures, and by morning, the clinical staff found themselves displaced by a team of women who moved with the sharp, coordinated precision of a high-stakes legal firm. Ivana and Bianca Voss arrived like a winter storm, their presence signaling that the recovery of Cassandra Quinn was no longer a medical matter, it was a family operation. While the machines continued to hum, the Voss sisters began the surgical extraction of Victor Laurent's secrets. Ivana, the elder sister with eyes like polished flint, sat at the edge of the bed, her laptop glowing in the dim light. She wasn't looking at medical charts, she was deep inside the encrypted layers of Victor's digital life. Beside her, Bianca, the more intuitive of the two, sifted through a mountain of intercepted mail and credit card statements. They worked in a rhythmic silence, occasionally trading glances that spoke of a growing disgust. To them, Victor wasn't just a criminal, he was a sloppy one, a man who thought his wife's silence was a permanent shield. "He's been busy, Ivana," Bianca murmured, sliding a photograph across the bedside table. In the image, Victor was laughing at a high-end lounge, his arm draped around a woman with sharp features and a predatory smile. "Her name is Celine. She's not just a mistress, she's a professional advisor at the casino where Victor lost the shipping dividends. She's the one who taught him how to forge the power of attorney documents." Ivana's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up a series of wire transfers. "It's worse than gambling, Bianca. He's been funneling Cassandra's inheritance into a shell company registered in Celine's name. They weren't just waiting for her to die, they were actively draining the reservoir before the dam broke. Look at the dates. The transfers tripled the week before the accident." Cassandra lay beneath the blue satin, her mind absorbing every revelation. The name Celine tasted like ash in her soul. She remembered the woman now, a friend Victor had introduced at a charity gala, someone he claimed was a grieving widow herself. The betrayal was a physical weight, a second paralysis that sat heavy on her heart. But as the sisters spoke, a new sensation began to flicker in the depths of Cassandra's consciousness. It wasn't just sadness, it was a cold, crystalline spark of rage. "Leonard wants the full dossier by sunset," Ivana said, her voice dropping to a low, protective tone as she looked at Cassandra. He wants to see every penny Celine touched. If she thinks she's going to spend the Quinn legacy on her offshore accounts, she hasn't met the Voss family yet. Bianca reached out, gently squeezing Cassandra's hand. For the first time, Cassandra's fingers didn't just feel like dead weight. Deep beneath the surface, a single nerve ending twitched in response to the sisters' resolve. The investigation was no longer just about proof, it was about building the ammunition for a war Victor Laurent was never prepared to fight. The transformation began not with a grand gesture, but with the scent of lilies and the steady, grounding presence of Serafina, the Voss family's most trusted physical therapist. The luxury suite had been stripped of its hospital dreariness, replaced by the quiet intensity of a training ground. Leonard stood by the window, a silent sentinel in his charcoal suit, watching as Serafina worked on Cassandra's legs. The progress was agonizingly slow, a battle fought in millimeters, but the atmosphere in the room had shifted from mourning to mobilization. "Focus on the spark, Cassandra," Serafina whispered, her voice a calm anchor. "Don't look at the mountain. Just look at the first stone." Cassandra closed her eyes, shutting out the gold-leafed ceiling and the memory of Victor's sneer. She reached deep into the void where her body used to be, searching for the connection that had been severed on that rainy night of the accident. She thought of the emeralds in Victor's pocket. She thought of Celine's laughter. The rage she had felt during Ivana's investigation became a conductor, a hot wire snaking through her nervous system. With a sharp, internal gasp of effort, her right big toe twitched against the silk sheets. The room went still. Leonard's eyes sharpened, his posture straightening. It was a tiny movement, but in the silence of the blue suite, it was a thunderclap. Again, Leonard commanded, his voice low and thick with an unfamiliar pride. Hour after hour, the work continued until the sun began to dip below the skyline. The physical victory was followed by a mental one that felt even more monumental. Serafina held a cup of water to Cassandra's lips, but instead of swallowing passively, Cassandra felt the muscles in her throat tighten. She didn't want the water, she wanted the words that had been locked behind her teeth like prisoners of war. She pushed against the paralysis, her lungs burning, her vocal cords straining against weeks of rust and trauma. Leonard moved to the bedside, his gloved hand hovering near her shoulder. He didn't offer pity, he offered the expectation of strength. Cassandra looked into his dark eyes, drawing from his bottomless well of iron will. Her lips trembled. A dry, rasping sound broke the quiet, a sound that was less than a whisper but more than a breath. Leo. The name was fractured, barely a ghost of a sound, but it hung in the air like a vow. It was her first word, a reclaimed piece of her soul. The innocent girl was gone, buried under the wreckage of the car and the weight of her husband's betrayal. In her place, a survivor was beginning to stand. She wasn't just recovering, she was reassembling herself into something sharper, something capable of holding a blade. Leonard leaned down, his face inches from hers, a grim smile touching his lips for the first time. "I'm here, little Quinn," he murmured. "And soon, the whole world will hear you, too." While Cassandra reclaimed her body in the quiet of the penthouse, a silent hurricane was being unleashed upon the world Victor Laurent thought he owned. Under the cold direction of Leonard Voss, the Shadow War began not with gunfire, but with the rhythmic tapping of keys and the methodical closing of doors. Tiago and Raphael, Leonard's most lethal instruments of enforcement and digital subversion, operated from a dimly lit command center 3 floors below the hospital suite. To Victor, it would feel like the ground was simply dissolving beneath his feet. Raphael, a man who viewed global banking systems as mere puzzles, worked with a terrifying, silent focus. He didn't just freeze Victor's accounts, he bled them. He traced the crooked path of the stolen Quinn inheritance through a labyrinth of shell companies and offshore havens. With a surgeon's precision, he redirected the flow of capital, pulling the stolen millions back into trust accounts Victor could see but never touch. Every time Victor tried to log in to check his balance, he found the numbers flickering, diminishing, and then vanishing into the Voss ether. Meanwhile, Tiago moved through the physical world like a reaper in a tailored suit. He visited the high-stakes poker dens where Victor had pledged money he didn't have. Tiago didn't make a scene, he simply sat across from the pit bosses and whispered a name. By the time he left, Victor's debts had been bought by the Voss family. Victor was no longer a man who owed money to the city's gamblers, he was a man who owed his very life to Leonard Voss. Tiago systematically contacted every business associate Victor had ever charmed, presenting them with a choice: sever ties with the traitor or face the full weight of Leonard's displeasure. One by one, the doors of the city's boardrooms slammed shut. By noon, Victor's luxury sedan was repossessed while he was still inside a cafe. By 2 o'clock, the lease on his secret apartment with Celine was terminated, his designer suits thrown onto the sidewalk in black plastic bags. Raphael watched through the GPS on Victor's phone as the man scrambled from one ATM to another, his face growing pale as every machine spat back his card with a clinical, "transaction denied." In the hospital room, Leonard stood by Cassandra's bed, holding a tablet that displayed the real-time destruction of Victor's life. He didn't look at the screen, he looked at Cassandra. She watched the red lines on the graph plummet, representing the end of Victor's influence. There was no pity in her eyes, only a quiet, burning satisfaction. The man who had whispered that she was better off dead was discovering that in Leonard's world, there were fates much more agonizing than death. The assets were gone, the allies had fled, and the cage was finally closing. Victor sat in the back corner of a dimly lit, wood-paneled steakhouse, the kind of place where the wine cost more than his father's first house. Across from him sat Celine, her fingers drumming a frantic, jagged rhythm on the white tablecloth. She wasn't looking at him with the predatory adoration of a mistress anymore, she looked at him like a sinking ship. Victor's plain white button-down was wrinkled, his goatee unkempt, that everyman charm he had cultivated for years now fraying at the edges. "I can't get into the accounts, Victor," Celine hissed, her voice sharp enough to cut the heavy air. "The shell company in the Caymans?" "Wiped." "The jewelry you gave me?" "The jeweler told me they were flagged as stolen property when I tried to liquidate them." "What have you done?" Victor reached for his glass of scotch, his hand trembling so violently the ice clinked against the crystal. "It's a glitch. Or a temporary freeze. Cassandra's lawyers must have triggered something before the accident." He leaned in, his voice dropping to that familiar, manipulative rasp. "We just need one more move. I have a meeting tonight with Julian and Damien. If I can convince them to bridge the gap, we can disappear before the Voss name carries any weight." It was a desperate gamble, a traitor's dinner, fueled by the delusion that he could still outrun a shadow. He didn't see the waiter who lingered a second too long near their table, a man with a discreet earpiece and the unmistakable build of a soldier. He didn't notice that the restaurant, usually bustling, was strangely empty of its regular elite. The only other patrons were men in dark suits who didn't eat, their eyes fixed on the exits. "You're a fool," Celine whispered, standing up and grabbing her clutch. "You told me she was a vegetable. You told me the inheritance was a guaranteed payout. I'm not going to prison for your incompetence." She turned to leave, but the door was blocked by Tiago. He didn't move, didn't speak, he simply stood there, a wall of granite in a tailored suit. Victor rose, his chair screeching against the floor, a sound of pure panic. He reached into his pocket, perhaps for a phone, perhaps for a weapon, but his fingers found only the empty space where his confidence used to live. At that moment, his phone buzzed on the table. A video call. Victor answered it with shaking thumbs, expecting a threat from a debt collector. Instead, the screen flickered to life, showing the blue-tinted luxury of the hospital suite. There, sitting upright in a chair for the first time, was Cassandra. She wasn't crying. She wasn't vulnerable. Beside her stood Leonard, his gloved hand resting protectively on the back of her chair. Cassandra stared into the camera, her eyes cold and crystalline. She didn't need to scream. The silence of the suite had moved to the restaurant, and as Victor looked at the woman he had tried to kill, he realized the gamble was over. The house had won, and the house belonged to Voss. The morning sun cut through the heavy drapes of the penthouse suite, but the woman standing before the floor-to-ceiling mirror was no longer the fragile girl who had been draped in blue satin. Cassandra Quinn reached out, her fingers, now steady and sure, tracing the glass. The reflection staring back at her was a stranger, yet more familiar than the woman she had been for the last 18 months. The soft, rounded lines of her face had sharpened, the wide, trusting eyes were now tempered with a crystalline hardness that only survival can forge. She was the ghost of her former self, and she found the haunting beautiful. Beside her, Bianca and Ivana stood like guardians of a new era. They hadn't just helped her walk, they had helped her strip away the layers of innocence that Victor had used as a handle to manipulate her. Bianca held out a garment bag, unzipping it to reveal a suit of deep, midnight silk, a sharp contrast to the hospital gowns of her imprisonment. As Cassandra stepped into the clothes, she felt the fabric settle like armor. Every button she fastened was a seal on her past, a quiet declaration that the prey had finished evolving. "The gala is tonight," Ivana said, her voice a calm, low vibration in the quiet room. "Victor thinks he's attending as the grieving heir. He's invited Julian and Damien to a private table, likely to sell them the final pieces of your father's shipping lanes in exchange for his own life. He has no idea the guest list has been amended." Cassandra picked up a lipstick from the vanity, a shade of crimson that looked like dried blood against her pale skin. She applied it with a surgical hand. She remembered the girl who used to hide behind her father's shadow, the girl who had let Victor Laurent take the lead because she thought it was a form of love. That girl had died in a car crash. This woman was something Leonard Voss had helped raise from the ashes, a partner in the shadow world who knew exactly how much a debt was worth. She turned to face the room, her movements fluid and deliberate. The paralysis was gone, replaced by a coiled tension. Leonard entered from the balcony, his black leather gloves replaced by a pair of silver cufflinks that glinted like knives. He didn't speak, he simply looked at her, his dark eyes reflecting the transformation he had catalyzed. "You look like a Quinn," he murmured, a rare note of genuine respect in his voice. "No," Cassandra replied, her voice no longer a rasp, but a clear, cold bell. "I look like someone who is about to collect what is owed." She looked back at the mirror one last time. The ghost was gone. In her place stood the new architect of the Quinn legacy, and she was ready to burn the old one down. The grand ballroom of the plaza was a sea of shimmering silk and whispered lies. Victor Laurent moved through the crowd with practiced ease, his goatee neatly trimmed, playing the part of the tragic hero to perfection. He stood at the center of a circle of influential donors, clutching a glass of champagne as he spoke of his dear, brave Cassandra. He felt the eyes of Julian and Damien on him from a corner booth, the sharks were waiting for their payment. Victor leaned into his performance, unaware that the air in the room had just turned several degrees colder. The heavy mahogany doors at the back of the hall swung open, and the music didn't stop, but the conversation did. It died out in a slow, jagged wave. Cassandra Quinn walked into the room not as a victim, but as a queen, She was draped in midnight silk that caught the light like oil on water, her stride rhythmic and powerful. To the socialites who had already begun writing her obituary, it was as if a ghost had reclaimed its flesh. Beside her, Leonard Voss walked in silence, his presence acting as a physical shield that forced the crowd to part like a retreating tide. Victor's glass slipped from his hand, shattering against the marble floor. The sound was like a gunshot in the sudden silence. He watched, paralyzed, as the woman he had tried to bury moved toward the stage. She didn't look at the crowd, she looked directly at him, her eyes holding a terrifying, luminous clarity. "Good evening," Cassandra said, her voice amplified by the microphone, clear and ringing with a cold authority that silenced even the servers. "I want to thank my husband, Victor, for being so patient during my absence. He has been so busy managing my family's estate that I thought it was only fair to share the results of his hard work with all of you." With a nod from Leonard, the massive digital displays behind the stage flickered to life. They didn't show photos of Cassandra's recovery. They showed bank statements. They showed the forged power of attorney documents. They showed high-resolution captures of Victor and Celine in the casino vaults and the forensic trail of the emptied inheritance accounts. The grieving husband's life was being dismantled in high definition before the very elite he had sought to impress. Victor lunged toward the stage, a desperate, feral snarl escaping his lips, but he was intercepted by Tiago and Raphael before he could take 3 steps. He thrashed in their iron grip, looking less like a man and more like a cornered animal. Cassandra looked down at him from the podium, her expression one of calm, detached justice. "You told me I was better off dead, Victor," she said, her voice carrying to the furthest corners of the room. "But as it turns out, I'm much better off without you." As the police, tipped off by Ivana's digital dossier, entered through the side doors, Leonard stepped up beside her. He didn't need to say a word. The unmasking was complete. The innocent girl was gone, and the woman who remained was the only one left standing. The chaos of the ballroom eventually faded into the rhythmic, low-frequency hum of the city night. Victor Laurent had been led away in handcuffs, his face a mask of ruined vanity, leaving behind a silence that felt like a long-awaited exhale. Cassandra stood on the balcony of the Quinn estate, the cold March air biting at her skin, but she didn't retreat. For the first time in years, she felt perfectly attuned to the world around her. The weight of the midnight silk was a comfort, a reminder that she was no longer a doll to be posed or a victim to be silenced. Leonard Voss stepped out of the shadows of the study, his movements as silent as the ink on a fresh contract. He didn't offer a celebratory drink or a hollow compliment. He simply stood at the railing, looking out at the glittering lights of Manhattan. The black leather gloves were gone, replaced by hands that had carried the weight of 100 blood debts, yet had chosen to spend this one on her survival. "The police have the recordings from the restaurant and the digital trail Raphael recovered," Leonard said, his voice a low anchor in the dark. "Victor won't be coming back. Not in this lifetime. And Celine has already fled to a jurisdiction where she will find no allies." Cassandra turned to him, her face illuminated by the moon. The innocence was gone, but in its place was something more enduring, a quiet, lethal wisdom. "You said you owed my father a debt. I think it's safe to say that debt is paid, Leonard." Leonard shook his head slowly, a grim, respectful smile touching his lips. "I only opened the door, Cassandra. You were the one who walked through it. You didn't need a savior, you needed the silence to end." He reached into his pocket and produced a small velvet box, the emeralds Tiago had recovered from Victor's pocket at the restaurant. He handed them to her, the stones glowing like the eyes of a jungle cat in the dim light. "Your legacy is intact. What you do with it now is up to you." Cassandra took the box, her grip firm and certain. She thought of the innocent girl she used to be and the new queen she had become. She had already begun making plans to turn her father's shipping lanes into a specialized network for protecting assets like hers, a framework to ensure no other woman would ever find herself trapped in the silence of a luxury suite. As Leonard turned to leave, vanishing into the night as discreetly as he had entered it, Cassandra looked back at the city. She was better off. She always knew she would be. She just needed one Tuesday evening, a door left 2 inches open, and the courage to wake up and take back what was hers. The debt was paid, the predator was caged, and for the first time, Cassandra Quinn was truly free. Cassandra Quinn's story is a dramatic one, filled with high-stakes underworld debts and cinematic justice, but the core of it, the arithmetic of cruelty, practiced by Victor Laurent, is something far too many people face in silence. Financial abuse and the betrayal of trust by those sworn to protect us aren't just plot points, they are real-life challenges that require more than just a guardian angel in a black suit. They require awareness, preparation, and the courage to look at the fine print of our own lives. Now, I want to turn the lens on you. We've all been in a position where we wanted to believe the best of someone, even when our instincts were whispering a different story. Think about the moment Victor leaned in to whisper those chilling words. He thought the door was closed. He thought he had total control because his victim couldn't speak back. If you were standing in that 2-inch gap of the doorway instead of Leonard Voss, what would your first move have been? Would you have recorded the confession? Would you have walked in and confronted him right then and there, or would you have played the long game, gathering evidence to ensure he could never hurt anyone again? And more importantly, let's talk about the Cassandra in all of us. She was a woman who built her life on kindness, only to have that kindness used as a weapon against her. Her transformation didn't just come from physical therapy, it came from reclaiming her voice. What is the voice you've been hesitant to use? Whether it's in a relationship, a career, or a family dynamic, where are you letting someone else write the script for you? This channel is more than just stories of revenge, it's a community of survivors and strategists. We believe that no one is better off dead, everyone is better off empowered. Stay sharp, stay vigilant, and most importantly, stay beautiful. We read every comment, and your story might just be the inspiration for our next deep dive. Hit that subscribe button to join the Voss Circle, and we'll see you in the next chapter.